Hey everyone, welcome to the Business Minded Sports Physio Podcast. My name is Brian Schwabe, board certified sports physical therapist, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Student Physical Therapist. I worked with elite athletes for over a decade and currently serve as the director of IO Sports Therapy, working side by side with high performance coaches, NFL and NBA skills trainers, and sports agents on a daily basis. I'm also an author, sports medicine consultant, course creator, speaker, and counselor sports therapist, traveling with professional athletes and celebrities. I created this podcast to share my experience as a sports physical therapist and entrepreneur so that I could give you everything you need to know to cash in on your passions, monetize your expertise, and create your own career Super Bowl. With that in mind, welcome to the podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Business Minded Sports Physio Podcast, where we dive into complex intersections of sports, business, and healthcare. I'm your host, Brian Schwabe, and today we have compelling topics to discuss: the balance of ethics and NIL deals, the concepts of self-fulfilling prophecies in sports medicine, and the fine line between being a medical professional and a profit-driven individual. Joining us today is Gina Pongetti-Angeletti, an experienced sports physical therapist who has worked with high-level athletes, Olympic-level gymnastics, business owner, course creator, and was my very first mentor in sports physical therapy. Gina, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. I'm honored. You were one of my first mentees in this too, from being a soccer player to showing interest in doing sports medicine. It's been fabulous to see you rise and develop your career and see all the success that you've had. Thanks.
I appreciate it. And honestly, I owe a lot of it to you. I know we've talked about that in the past, but you inspired me to be a physical therapist in the first place. And I was very, very lucky to meet you early on before I even started this journey. So this is fun. This is cool.
Part of being a PT in my mind always has been to teach the athlete how to take care of themselves and to want to make you want to be healthier. And not only that, but when you want to be healthier, you want to make other people better too. So most athletes that go into being PTs they do it because they've experienced something that wasn't good and they want to be what they didn't have, or they experienced what they did have, which thank goodness was us. And how you've spread knowledge and the way that you educate, that's the way to do it. PT's not responsive. It has to be proactive, and it's taking care of the whole individual. And I know you're doing that out west, so I'll hold the fort down in the Midwest. You do that direction and we'll meet in the middle.
I love it. There we go. Well, I want to dive into things on NIL deals today first. There's a few different segments that we've talked about just privately, and we had great discussions. So I really want to go into that. So I'm going to start with this. Given the rise of these NIL deals, there's been a lot of debate about how they impact medical professionals who work with collegiate athletes. Can you share your thoughts on the ethical considerations that come into play?
Well, I've been around for 23 years, so I have seen I've seen athletes get used and abused for their name, and colleges are making money off of them. I've seen the rise of everyone getting frustrated and choosing to either go and do collegiate sports or not. So in gymnastics, the rule used to be that if you took any money at all prior to, it was like most sports, that you couldn't go into doing your NCAA career. And with gymnastics, especially how serious it is very interesting because that's where you have fun when you get to NCAA. So people often would think, if I'm going to make $2-3 million, then no problem. Let's, back off a little bit and maybe pay for college on our own. We don't need to have the NCAA experience. But for those that were kind of in the middle, you had to not even take small things like free leotards or free Gatorade or protein bars because you didn't want to ruin the ability to be a professional, considered a professional athlete, and therefore give up your NCAA eligibility. Now you have the ability to do both. And I think from a PT and a mental health perspective, sports medicine, I manage so many of these NCAA athletes, their whole health, mental, physical well-being. And it's great to have them be able to monetize on it, but the stress and the mental health and the time balance that comes with that is a challenge. I think that we saw that, and this is not even NCAA, but professional athlete wise, we saw that when we were looking at Simone in Tokyo in the 2020 Olympics held in 21, and the stress that kind of gets to you just with having to live up to what the media is making of you. So like Livy Dunn, obviously the highest NIL paid right now, and she's a NCAA gymnast. She did not compete at nationals, but obviously is an integral part of the team. And she seems to be balancing the stress of the media and the focus and constant photo shoots and everything with still being able to maintain. But there's an ethical line to that. And at what point in time do you still owe your college the best of you to compete versus all the time that you're spending doing all the work for advertisers and NIL deals? I think you and I talked, which is one of the most interesting things. I've had many conversations, especially since your brother played college football. I was talking to your dad about this too, that the end of an NCAA football career with a bowl game often coincides with when people are committing to play professional sports. And we have a ton of people who are straddling that line. And it's one more game that they could get injured in, one more opportunity for them to have a damaged body before they leave. And there's a real big conundrum with, do I push and play in this game, or do I save myself for pros? And then does the athlete owe college the ability to do this because college paid them to go? This yin and yang. I've given you your education. I've given you your bus rides and your plane rides and your, competing. And do you owe me the ability to do that? And if they pull out of that bowl game, is that actually a contract liability or a breach? So lots of fun things.
Yeah, we see that with our football players too. It's different because sometimes they're not paid strictly just from their college, right? They're getting NIL deals elsewhere. So they have all these different NIL deals at one time. And we are seeing a lot of them pull out of these bowl games now. So you're right. And that's the tricky part. So how do you feel, as a sports medicine professional, how do you navigate these pressures while maintaining ethical standards?
Well, isn't that interesting? So psychology, I love it. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I love his books. It's not a plug for him. I get nothing from him. I just truly love him as an author. And
I do too.
The socioeconomic balance of it, pulling in sociology, pulling in the economics of sports, pulling in medical, Hippocratic oath, all the things that go into treating. And, philosophers have always said, once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. Once you are in a position, you can't take the position out of the person. So Gina as the medical director for MedGym, or Susan as the head physician for University of Michigan, or whatever you are, you can never take that position away from the person. So the decisions that you're making always have, as humans always say, there's always ego in mind, if you will. So does a person who is allowing an athlete to play, are they allowing that athlete to play because truly they are ready to play and they're cleared and it's okay for them? Are they allowing them to play because for this game it's important and it'll benefit the university the most possible, but potentially leave them with something life-changing if the fracture gets worse, if your bone chip shifts, if the meniscus tears more? Are they doing it because they want a promotion and because they want to stay in good standing with the sports medicine department? And are they letting them play because they get benefits, soft or hard benefits, from the coaching staff? So when you look at someone who is, let's say, employed by a large organization, Stedman, HSS, Loyola, Northwestern, whatever it is, and you are making decisions for yourself as Brian, but you're making decisions on behalf of your company, is it in the best interest of the athlete, or do you have some sort of ego driven to it? I was a huge part of the coaching safer in sports. We have had a couple coaches removed from USA Gymnastics because of their mental and physical abuse. And so much of their ego driven is that their product is the performance of the athlete. And are you pushing that athlete to perform because you can push through something small? Or are you pushing that athlete to perform because you want them to win something, because that's the product of your coaching for the year? And it's like Kellogg's. If you print a bad cereal box, it's the printer's fault. But if the athlete doesn't do what they're supposed to do, that's your product. So there's so much that goes into that decision making. A couple of years ago, within a couple of the professional sports organizations I work with, and 2 Olympic national governing bodies, we had some very interesting discussions on athletes that were injured, who are in the news, who are trying to make something for themselves, who are writing books, who are trying to make a comeback, and organizations are trying to push them to potentially compete when maybe it isn't the safest. And it's all about free choice right now and saying, well, here's your options. This is what your MRI looks like. You could do this, but you also could compete. It's up to you. And at some point in time, these athletes are looking to us for, is this okay for today? Is this going to make me not walk in 6 weeks? Or am I going to be limping when I'm 60 and not able to squat to the ground? And you just have to be really careful as an athlete who you choose and what their vested interests and ties are to. So much, even just like a Con Ed course where you have to say what your disclosures are, who you're being paid by, who you're representing, who you're an ambassador of. I think as an athlete, you have to look and see what is the motivation of the individual giving me advice. I have very, very few people publicly thank me. I've worked with thousands of elite athletes, professional athletes. No one knows unless the athlete approves and, agrees to it. So my motivation is clearly not for PR, and it's not like we're, on television doing commercials. So if a decision is made, it's made in the best way. I think the Olympics are great. I think NCAA championships are awesome. I think winning an MLB title is fantastic. I think that most people who are 60 who can't bend over or squat to the ground would say that as much as it was wonderful, they would have rather had a hip that worked if they were pushed too hard. And so there is always that cost and that ratio of risk reward. And if it's a broken pinky finger, maybe we push through it. If it's a spondy or a listhesis and there's potential of having long-term damage, there's a lot more that has to go into that conversation. And I just hope that these athletes, from a medical ethics perspective, are being guided in the right way and having their options laid out for them.
Those are unbelievable points. And I want to touch upon it a little bit further because I think it happens in team sport at the professional level too. We're seeing a shift now, and I know you're aware of this as well. We've talked about this. There's a shift from athletes trusting their team medical professionals and wanting to go more private sector anyways because of those exact dilemmas. But at the same time, in the private sector, there are plenty of those same ethical dilemmas because you're seeing all these physical therapists, clinicians, athletic trainers, strength coaches that are trying to build their brand or say, hey, look at me, or getting on the news or whatever it may be. So it happens across the board. And this kind of lets us dive into this next kind of section of self-fulfilling prophecies in sports medicine. And I want to move on to that concept because how do you feel like this manifests in sports medicine? I know you've been touching upon it, but how do you feel like this manifests in sports medicine considering high-level athletes?
I think going back to the team physician conversation is that a physician can make a decision to see or not see something. An athlete can make a decision to be true to what they have diagnosed or view it as just pain. So let's give you a continuum. My shoulder hurts. My arm doesn't work well. I have a football game next week. So right now, all I have is shoulder pain. It is not unethical to allow somebody to go into a game with pain. As soon as you cross the line of knowing something, you can't unknow it. Even though we can do clinical tests, we can do sulcus signs forever, the shoulder can essentially fall out. You could have the ability to not even cross your arm across your body. But until proven, it's not true. So I think the psychology of the athlete also convinces themselves that unless it's on paper and it's black and white, it is also still not true. So I'm getting back to self-fulfilling prophecy in a second. Go with this. The athlete will choose to have an MRI done or not. A physician will choose to have a CT, MRI, diagnostic ultrasound, bone scan done or not. Sometimes because they're trying to find an answer to something, and other times because they might be trying to not find an answer to something. And for those of you who are starting out in the profession, Brian and I want to also always disclose that wonderful virginal aspect of sports are wonderful and everyone has everyone's best interest at heart still exists in 98% of the people out there. But when ego gets in your way, it gets really hard to be making decisions. And add on to that if something is on paper, now when we're going for contract renewals and we're going for picking an Olympic team and we're going for things, now something is actually on paper. If you have shoulder pain in private or ankle pain in private, nobody knows, it's not affecting your performance, then no one can see that you're limping or doing things different. But as soon as it's on paper, it's an issue. So how many NFL players have you dealt with, Brian? I probably would say I've dealt with 50, but 5 to 7 where they're doing cash pay, no named MRIs because they're finding docs that are willing to do it for them. It's a renewal year and they just want to make sure that they don't have a stress reaction, or they just want to make sure that their ligament is intact. And if they need to pursue it with their old team, they can. Then all of a sudden the MRI becomes true. And if they don't, then they just do it on the side, make sure, and then it doesn't affect contracts and re-signing and free agency value and everything else. From an Olympic sport perspective, where people are chosen to be on a team, when you are chosen with an injury, you are chosen with a handicap, and someone has to be pretty awesome to be able to push through that. So from an NGB perspective, are we actually diagnosing things, or are we waiting to diagnose them to make sure that they don't have something on paper that makes the organization look medically unethical? Or are we dealing with an athlete that might not be psychologically very strong? So we're just going to tell them, it's okay. Nothing seems to be showing up. You're actually just fine. And then that self-fulfilling prophecy of I want to be fine is then further strengthened by tests that are telling you you're fine. It's like x-raying a shoulder for a rotator cuff issue. What's showing up? Unless we have something avulsing from bone, it's like perfect. I'm like, I want to see how high you can jump, so let me stretch your wrist out. I mean, they're not related. So that you can find what you want. You can also find what you don't want to find. I get MRIs all the time. They're 3 pages long and people are like, oh my God, I'm dying. And I'm like, absolutely. Most of this is fine over 30. This is fine if you're a pitcher. This is fine if you're this. So sometimes you have to sift through it because everyone wants to cover their butts and over radiologically diagnose things. But you can hide it if you want to. You can find it if you want to. And there's so much ethics that goes into that. I mean, beyond. And, physicians still run the world, sadly. Even though we are very educated individuals and we can say things, but then for us, sometimes saying things puts us in a pickle too, of not having them do favors or have us have better communication. So there's always 15 different options when there's a conversation. People are like, no, if she needs an MRI, just get an MRI. And I'm like, oh gosh, no, there's 17 steps before that with 18 different if-then algorithms as to who you ask, when you ask, do you bring it up? Do you say it? Do you not? How is that going to make this person react? And I'm sure I'd love to hear some of your stories as to how you've dealt with this as well, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And that's tough because I can see both sides of it still. I can see both sides of it. And there's, like you said, 18, 20, 30 different ways that you can go with every single athlete, depending on the situation, the level of the athlete, the thing they're dealing with. But I've had so many professional basketball, football players, baseball players that will come and get MRIs or see a doctor outside of their team during a contract year or in the middle of the season, or even come see me or my colleague in the season for treatment as opposed to their own team because they don't want it to be used against them. And it could be something minor.
They don't trust the medical people on their team. It might be that too, but the using it against them is it. You would think that it would never happen, and it happens all the time. We're in the middle of Olympic trials of every sport. And I guarantee I know 25 people right now that were at swimming yesterday that are using people that are outside, and track and field. I see a great majority of our gymnasts and skaters and everything else. And sometimes they're like, I don't want you to say anything. And if it's to somebody's safety issue, it's a whole nother level, right? If someone's elbow is so bad that I think that, if they're telling me and then they go to vault and they're going to kill themselves. Like, I mean, that's a whole different issue, right? If it's a safety issue, but if it's just I don't think that this really doesn't hurt that bad. I'd like to get it treated, but I know if someone knows about it, that it might change how they view me. That is also a communication, culture and trust issue between the NGB and the athletes, which of course gymnastics is doing a good job trying to fix since all the NASAR stuff, which I was very involved in. There's been a ton of cultural change. I think with figure skating, there's been a big cultural shift too. I still think with profit sports that have big contract renewals like baseball, basketball, football, you can say that there's a culture shift, but the front office is always going to view anything that comes up that's documented as a risk. And people will then therefore always use private professionals like you and I to manage their healthcare in a way where they know they're getting fully honest answers from us, and they can then make decisions on what they'd like to do moving forward in competition. And if it becomes an issue where it affects performance, obviously the organizations, the NGBs, the medical professionals can see it. They stop throwing as fast. They're shaking their arm after they're done throwing discus. They're literally taping their ankles like concrete before, they're competing. So, there's a trust factor. And sadly, sometimes, and I've had this brought to my attention as well, those listening, you know who you are, that sometimes when you treat privately, it brings a further wedge between the athlete and their governing body organization, because you are part of the problem of that wedge. But then my answer is, why isn't that athlete trusting their organization enough that if they do have an injury or an issue, that they're respected for coming forward for it and not having it held against them in a negative way? And that goes way into like safe sport certification, where we talk about bullying and we talk about the power dynamic between the coach and the athlete. And the power dynamic between the coach and the athlete is always coach above athlete until the athlete says, I don't want to compete anymore. And then the coach is like, please compete. And now it switches. But where does the medical professional fall, right? The coach is still in charge of the athlete, but isn't the medical professional above everybody with regards to what's best from a medical perspective, unless this coach is in medicine? And so you have all these didactic relationships and all these power duos that then become trios that then move back and forth. Like I said to you on the phone the other day, one of the funniest things, I mean this sarcastically, somebody said was, an ankle's just an ankle. I mean, if it's my mom's ankle and if it's a pro athlete's ankle, it's the same ankle. And I'm like, well, an ATFL is the same in every athlete, except it does a little bit more in a professional athlete potentially. Rehab times are a concern. Surgical times are a concern. Being off is a little bit different. The psychology of it, the communication patterns. So no, it's not the same. Like, it's like two different foreign languages.
Yeah, you are so right on that. And, and those that are listening to this, we have shifted into this medical versus profit driven type scenario, right? And I think a lot of younger sports clinicians that are just getting into sports medicine, who haven't dealt with this yet, but might one day, I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you think they should handle those situations when they first start to see them, and how do they start to gain experience without gaining experience? Because I think you and we had to kind of go through the trenches just to figure that out, right? And have mentors to talk to, but you still kind of just got to be in it to see it 1,000 times before you actually start to have these understandings and make decisions.
I mean, I don't know how many text messages and phone calls I got from you in the beginning, but I would definitely say my answer is, and I did the same with my mentors, right? The late Chris Buckheister, who was awesome, and so many other people within the PT sports world, is you cross things by people all the time to see if someone's outside opinion. Hey, I have this guy, he's got this ankle issue. I'm getting pressure from the university to make them play because they were in all the hype for this week and it's homecoming game. But I know in my heart that MRI looked really, really gross. And I know that if he plays, not only is he going to be on some pain meds, but this might knock him out for the rest of the season. And the PR department has come in and they've done all these videos. And so I feel like this kid is under so much psychological stress that he feels like he owes it. And talking it out loud kind of just goes through, from an outsider's perspective, you go, listen, what do you want to do? Do you have a difficult boss and you need to impress them so that you can get promoted within your organization? Is that your goal? Is your goal to always stand by the athlete? Sometimes even a really ethical person, I think, such as you and I, can make some gray decisions in order for the greater good, right? Like my husband always says, sometimes staying silent for a hot second might mean that you can have a voice in a minute. And that's true as long as it doesn't compromise your morals. So I remember writing things down when I was first starting, things that I would never, ever, ever compromise on. One of them was that I wanted every athlete that I ever saw at 60 to say thank you for protecting me in the long run. Every athlete. I wanted everybody from a billing and financial perspective. I never wanted anyone to say she charged too much. I wanted to give to every athlete every minute their money's worth out of everything that they got, whether that was me, a tech, an assistant, communication, my front office, didn't matter. And 3, if I can't put my head on a pillow at night because it keeps me up making a decision, that I know the decision, even though it's going to be a hard one, and I have to write it down and make it the next day. So as I sit involved in many organizations that have more ethical issues than we have types of white bread. So, but as long as you are staying true, and somebody else's focus might be, I'd like to climb the ladder fast enough so that once I'm there, I can then make a difference. Cool, good for you, as long as you're not stepping on people and forgetting about people in the long run. And I see that way too much. So some 23-year-old PT or AT is with an organization and they have an ethical decision to make. I mean, when you have a 45-year-old boss that's been doing it for 20 years and they don't like controversy, I think that's really difficult. And that goes back to communication skills. But asking them if you can sit down and have them listen to your thought process and how you are ethically making this decision, and say, I just need you to hear me out. I don't need you, when I say one thing, to counter what I'm saying. I need 10 minutes. I just need you to listen. I've written out what I'd like to say. If we choose to do cortisone, this is what's going to happen. If we don't choose to do it, this is what's going to happen. If we keep them on pain meds, we're going to get them to the bowl game, but then what is it going to do to this or whatever? And sometimes when it's in front of someone's face, even a moderately ethical person will have to be faced with the fact that, wow, somebody else knows that if we make this decision, it's not a good idea. It's that whole thing of like, if you're on an island, would you still make the proper decision? Some people need somebody to call them out on it. So oftentimes, even a difficult person, if you have weighed the medical treatment and ethical options and present it to somebody. I work with a ton of Broadway and Chicago stuff too. This is a whole nother thing, because obviously I got you into a bunch of this performing arts and professional touring artists and Broadway things and everything else. So much of that is contract based, right? I mean, you come back from having a cold or a cough. Most of our audience is probably be like, what are you talking about? You come back from having a cold and a cough and you're in Les Mis or Rent or Hamilton or something. And yes, everybody wants to see the people that are on the playbill in the lead. But if you're not all the way better and you're forcing your lungs and your voice to do something for this 2-week stint in Chicago before they get to this, before they get to the next show, to the next 10 years of their lives, they could be harming themselves. So oftentimes we have to say, no, they're not ready to come back yet. Oh, you're too conservative. No, I'm protecting this person for you for the longevity of their career. Well, they're only with me for 6 months. That's you, but I have the ethical duty to make sure that they're going to be okay. Plus, I want them to be in every show for you for the next 6 months. So do you want tomorrow's show, or do you want 6 more months of someone being healthy? It's all relative. But I think when you're starting out, you just need to find a good mentor. And if you don't have one, message people like us that are good and say, hey, would you be willing to be a sounding board for me? Have it be outside of the organization you work with for absolute certain, so that when you show any sort of weakness, which I don't believe is weakness, which is asking questions, no one can judge that your ability to want to be really ethical and bounce ideas is viewed as weakness and not having answers. It shouldn't be, by the way. You should ask a million questions. I have textbooks on my desk and in my office for days because I'm always referencing things. But asking and double checking can sometimes be viewed as, how did they not know that? So find somebody outside your organization, sometimes someone who's retired, who's been there. Make sure that you watch, again, self-fulfilling prophecy, who you're picking. Are you picking someone who's bitter with the organization? Are you picking someone who's invested in it because they get lifetime tickets and they'll never say anything bad? Or are you picking someone who's honestly going to give you devil's advocate in a really good, ethical way? But everything from, hey, can you just treat this guy on the side, to, hey, I saw you taking Joe to x-ray yesterday. Is everything okay with him? And someone says to you, oh, you weren't supposed to see that. We're not going to talk about this again. I mean, these are all very, very interesting power dynamic. Oh, then I shouldn't say anything because now I'm going to get in trouble. Or if I bring this up, am I going to not be promoted? And, this is life. It's not easy, and lasting in professional sports for over 2 decades is not easy, and it takes its toll on you. You can see, but it's well worth it because these people need an advocate. None of these athletes are psychologists. None of them have medical degrees, and unfortunately, those of us that are in it for the right reason have to make sure we're protecting them and standing up for them.
Phenomenal. I love it. See, this is what I got.
Tell me, I want an example from you. I'm spinning it now on you, guest and host. I mean, what do you think? What do you think in your mind tested you the most in the very beginning? I mean, did you have sleepless nights over something? Was it organizational decision? I mean, where? You know how they always say that the devil tests you, right? Yeah, I love bread. I mean, I could say I'm on a diet and you put bread in front of me and I'm like, oh, you're testing me. Like, where were you the most tested and how did you handle it?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's even just one. There's so many, and it's. I don't want to say it's also the area I live in, but it's kind of the area I live in. Los Angeles is different, right? And we've talked about that a lot too. Coming from Chicago and then coming to Los Angeles, but there's a lot out here. You have Hollywood, you have the music industry, you have professional sports agencies, you have professional sports, you have some of the best doctors. So there's a lot. It's a big mecca, right, for sports medicine in general, and there are so many types of sports medicine professionals that you come across, whether it's doctors, athletic trainers, strength coaches, physical therapists, bosses, whoever it may be. And
you've just named, and by the way, you've just named the actual sports medicine professionals who are licensed, let alone all of the ones who are personal health coaches and all of the people who aren't trained, who are trying to get your business.
Yeah, you're right. And there's so many of those, but they also tend to get the younger athletes, right? Like, I can't tell you, I'll get the one example I will give you is I had a NBA draft player that was hell-bent on working with this, for lack of a better word, just whack job of a guy that was trying to say that he was manipulating his stomach to fix his pinky toe, and it was gonna, he was one of like 5 people in the whole world that could do that, and it was gonna fix his jump shot, and I was like, I'm on the phone with this guy, with the sports agent, and we're texting each other on the side like, holy shit, like we need to have a conversation with our player, but our player also trusts that person. So how do you then ethically, but also morally, and also just to protect the player, have that conversation, be like, this is not your person long term, without trying to interject and say, I'm your person. I wasn't even trying to go there. I was just saying, listen, this is not your person that you should be taking all your advice from while you're about to enter the league as a first-round draft pick. And that's tough to do, because
I think part of it comes with years of experience, though, Brian. I mean, when you have in the beginning of your career versus now, it's even probably easier for you. 2 decades in, I just look at people and I say, I've been doing this for 2 decades. I've been taking care of Olympians for 5, for now, I don't know, 22 years. and I'm doing something right. So you can listen to me or you cannot. And I'm not saying that I would rather see you. I don't even want to say that. But what the advice that you're getting or where you were going for treatment or what you're doing is not the right thing for you because of XYZ. And when you outline it and say, this is not where you need to be, you can go wherever you'd like to, but I'm just trying to help you, that I don't think that this is good for you. A lot of it comes with COUT and a lot of it comes with experience. And I think when you're first starting out, they look at you as someone who's like, oh, well, you want me too. So now we're competing. But once you've been doing it for a while, your name and your reputation holds water, which is a whole nother reason to try to be ethical and to guard, there are very few things that you have in life. People can have opinions on you. You can say one thing and it can be interpreted another way, but your intent and your morals and your ethics and how you run yourself can never be taken away from you. And I think after years and years, people say that, and they say, listen to Brian, because he really got me out of this funk or pulled me into finding someone for me in New York, or whatever it is. So it's hard, especially when you're dealing with the agent who doesn't know, Brian, that you're right or the other person's right, because the agent doesn't know anything about medicine at all. So they're just looking to opinions, and they want to make their player happy, and it's fun.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is have a good reputation with the athlete. That's more important than anything, in my opinion, because you can always have different opinions with other medical professionals or other professionals in general. But if the athlete is happy, they're going to continue to talk about you, continue to trust you, because they know you have your best interests at heart. They're their best interests at heart. So that's my advice to people: is just do right by the athlete always first, and it takes care of everyone else's relationships long term. It might not happen at first, but it will happen over time.
Well, that's another good point. Don't come trying to work for you or I and say, when do I get to treat my first NBA player? When am I going to be backstage on Hamilton? Or when when will I be sidelines at USA Gymnastics or travel for figure skating? And I'm like, calm down a second. It's going to take you years just to understand how to manage people. Then you get local sports kids. Then maybe you take on a team like a dance studio that's local. Then maybe you take on something higher. But I mean, 10 years in, 5 to 10 years in is when you should start dabbling. And if you happen to get somebody before that, that's great, but let it ride its course. Let experience build you. Don't force it, because getting connections and doing it the right way is the right way to do it. It's the right way to do it.
I completely agree. Okay, I have one more question for you, and this is a little off topic, but I gotta give you your flowers for a second here, because you've been working with high level athletes and working Olympic level gymnastics for a very, very long time. And ever since I've known you, and that was back in high school, so that was over 20 years ago. Oh my God.
Long time.
But point being is, I know you just recently launched this really comprehensive gymnastics course, which is awesome, by the way. So I want you to tell us a little bit about that, because I know how much detail you go into when you teach, because I've heard you for years. Please tell us a little bit about your course.
Oh, well, the fun end goal is to take everything that's in my brain and teach it, which is like, 50 people having conversations at one time. I was blessed to have some very good mentors in medicine who really do address treating people from the mind, body, soul, spirit, student athlete balance, the best doctors, the best diagnosticians, the best decision-making process. And I think so many continuing ed courses just are like, here's a fracture. Here's what we do for the fracture. Here's how many weeks off, and here's where you go. Nobody talks about the culture of the sport. How many hours are they on? What can they do when they're not fully capable? How can we keep them engaged? Sports psychology, everything from blood chemistry to every single person that gets a long-term injury. Are we addressing nutrition and autoimmune, how we're feeding the system into getting better? Are we addressing the parents and the stress at home? Are we doing long-term goal planning, strength and conditioning? So it is literally 15 modules put into 10 courses. So some modules are back to back over the course of a year, because it's 28 hours plus. And we do the course. We can come to you and do the course in 2 days as well, or 2 or 3 days. It's 2.5, and be in a gym and be feeling mats and stuff. But there are so many people who treat gymnasts like yourself. You were never a gymnast, Brian, but you're smart enough sports medicine wise to be able to treat it. Are you smart enough to be able to have the resources to return them to sport properly? And so we're giving people who were gymnasts or who like gymnastics the ability to learn the whole picture of how the sport is developed. We talk about ground reaction forces. We talk about equipment testing at the FIG level, coefficient of friction and how that affects the angle and when you're vaulting. I mean, we're doing all the funky nerd stuff, but I call it fun science nerd. I mean, nobody would know that I was a theater nerd who played clarinet, because I absolutely love science and sports medicine. But you got to pull all that stuff into it, because you're not going to understand what the wrist goes through if you don't understand what a proper handstand should look like, so that you know what the stresses are. I mean, it's very sport specific. So we have a lot of fun with it. I try to be a really fun and not dry presenter. Everyone's going to be getting up out of their chairs, even at home, doing self-assessment things. There's worksheets that go along with it. It took 3 years to get this done. We have over 400 sources. We've done peer-reviewed magazines and articles and books that are just written by people who were in the sport, and we're trying to teach from all aspects, objective and subjective. We have continuing ed credits for PT, AT, and in some states for MD, DO, for everything. So we're trying to reach as many people as possible, because life is busy. It was supposed to slow down after COVID again, and now it's still busy. Everything is done virtual, so it's live courses that are virtual, and then everything will be available on demand. If for some reason you can't catch up with the live ones, you can on demand watch them and then catch up moving forward. And there's a gymnastic sports certification. So if you finish all the courses and then you do, we have a couple demands at the end. So if you do some case studies and some peer-reviewed literature work, and an interview with me and some things, you actually get a certification at the end. And we are going to create a MedGym Gymnastics Professionals referral page. So people who go through this in any part of the country can look up someone who's been educated and certified, and hopefully choose them for treatment as well. So it's a labor of love. I think it's all the years of experience. I mean, I've seen people tear their ACLs. I've seen spinal cord injuries. I've seen bones sticking out. I've seen coaches screaming at people. I've seen triumph. I've seen wonderful coaches and athletes walk their athletes through injury the right way. And until you've seen it, you can't learn it, like you said before, but you want to learn it. But how do you learn it? I know this is a weird word to use, blessed and the word Nassar in the same sentence, but back when I first started, I was blessed with the opportunities when Larry was involved with gymnastics, among many other medical staff, to be able to work all these events and just, take in the knowledge of how events run and how recovery rooms run and how medical services run. And with that, I was obviously given the opportunity to walk through a path of pure health for a little while. So I want to force and stress on people that what you learn in school is 10%. What you think you learn on the job is like 30%. And what you learn when you put yourself in positions with professional athletes is all experiential, and you have to be there to do it. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of being there. I can't take 10 mentees with me when I travel, and so how do you learn it? So I'm going to try to teach it, and it's going to be amazing. And it's really reasonably priced. It's like $1,000 for the whole year to do the courses, and you can do it from your own home, and you get your con eds, and we'll have some nerd fun, which will be great.
That's awesome.
So
that's awesome. And to give you a plug, listen, like she said, I was never a gymnast, and I literally was able to consult with a gymnastics gym because of you and the knowledge you would give me over the phone every week for 3 years before the pandemic. And I was never a gymnast, and I made a difference. And that was the most important thing. I made a difference, and I'm one a billionth of what you can do. So I know the knowledge you're putting into
But
these courses.
making a difference, Brian, is also just being aware, right? Being aware of, I use this as an example. Like, you have a kid and you have an ankle sprain, and maybe they have a full tear and they've been immobilized and they're not confident in themselves at all. And you do everything from Y balance testing to, you can do V move, you can do all these fancy tests on them, right? And you're like, you're ready. Your jump test is ready, your agility is ready, your strength is ready, and they still show trepidation. Why? Is it because in an individual sport? Is it because their parents are stressing them out? In a team sport, is it because they're left behind? Is it truly their foot? All of a sudden, a pain of a 2 out of 10 becomes a 4 because there's a meet coming up and they might not do well. So they're like planting the seed of failure, of reasonable failure before it happens. And are you part-time psychologizing this? And are you social working the dynamics of the gym? And you can't do that unless you understand team dynamics and you understand the culture. And, little questions like, hey, how's gym today? How's your team? Are the same girls you worked out with last year on your team? How are they doing? How are you doing? How do you feel? And you just get these little snippets. And then you're just like, in your mind, you don't call them out. Physically, you seem great. It feels like we need to just say to you, let's make our goal the third meet to do really well. This first one, my goal for you, 100% success, is to just live, succeed, make it through. And it just takes one person to tell them that, to take the pressure of the world off their shoulders. And you can't know that unless you know the culture of the sport and the dynamics of stuff. And that is something that you have, that I hope I've taught you and that you have developed, but that those small conversations and paying attention to not what they say, but how they say it, how they respond to you, how liberal they are with information that they're giving you, and how nervous they might be. It says a ton about their comfort level and stress, not just their ankle. And that's, even with Derrick Rose with the Chicago Bulls, right? I mean, you can have an injury, you can have an ACL, and someone can tell you that you need to come back, and you could be at 99.9%. But if you're missing 1/10 of 1 second in reaction speed, you still feel slow, which means you're telling yourself you're not ready yet. And someone's got to pick up on that.
That's awesome.
That's you.
How do you find your course? Tell us about the name of the course and where you can find your course.
Yeah. So MedGym, MEDGYM, there's our logo, is the name of the company, and it's medgym.net, MEDGYM.net. And you go under courses. I'm doing a bunch of media work as well, medical media work in Tokyo. So there's all kinds of neat links to some of the articles I've written and publications, but the courses and the sign up links are all on the website. My local, my baby, my bread and butter is Achieve, which is the sports medicine clinic that's in Chicago. But that's only here. So we're only helping people that are local or that can afford and have the resources to fly in. So MedGym is wherever you are, we can get to if you have the internet. So,
awesome.
Please let us know if you need anything. And like I said, pick a good mentor, but kudos to Brian too. You got to be a good mentee. And you got to be willing to listen, and you have to be willing to ask questions, and you have to know that asking questions does not make you stupid. And it does not mean that you don't know what you're doing. In the privacy of your mentorship relationship or a small group that you have created, no judgment zone, right? It should be whenever, we still have it. I have a small PT group. There's PTs that work with all the NGBs, and we're all friends and we talk to each other, and no one's ever like, wow, how did she not know that? I don't work with concussions as much as somebody else does. So I would always ask a question. You got to be a good receiver. You have to be a good mentee in order to grow. And if you're not, then that's going to come back to bite you. Start your own clinic whenever you want, but don't be on your own. You can't be an island.
Love it. Gina, thank you so much for your insights on these super complex but important issues. I think it's clear that maintaining ethical standards in sports medicine is challenging, but absolutely essential for the health and well-being of athletes, and also for teaching people, right, of helping other physical therapists, sports medicine professionals learn how to be better as a sports medicine professional. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Brian, so much. Best of luck.
Awesome. And thanks to all our listeners for tuning into the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. Remember, our primary goal as medical professionals is to do what's best for our athletes, not what's best for your brand. Stay ethical, stay committed, and until next time, take care.